Okay. Hi, Kris. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Douglas?
Doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. It's nice to have you here. So I'm reading through your bio. The first thing I wanted to ask you, it says you are the Blume Professor of Law and Director of the Juvenile Justice Clinic and Initiative at Georgetown Law. What is the Blume Professor? I've never heard that term.
Ah, so that is a named chair, a professorship. The Blooms, Bruce and Ann Blume, donated money to Georgetown Law School specifically to advance public interest in social justice work at Georgetown Law School. And so there is a professorship that is also associated with that.
Oh, I see. In their name because of the donation. Okay, I got it.
Correct.
Okay. You've also written a book, and you're here to talk about. The book is called The Rage of Innocence, How America Criminalizes Black Youth. Have you written other books, or is this your first one, your first published book?
This is my first full-length solo book. So I do have another book that I co-edited with two other youth justice advocates called Race, Rights, and Reform. And that is a collection of essays on various issues related to race and juvenile justice reform. I also have a number of chapters in books, but this is my first solo book project.
Why did you decide to write your book, this book?
Well, I've been representing children in the nation's capital for 26 years. And what I saw in that entire time was that I only represented 4 white children, and that is it. And it just really is disturbing. It's really difficult to do the work as long as I have and not want to ask the really hard questions, which is why are there such extreme racial disparities? In 26 years, 4 white children and every other child that I represented was African American. If you are not from Washington, D.C., or not familiar with the nation's capital, you might believe that there are no white children in the city limits or that white children don't commit crime, and neither one of those would be true. So I wrote the book to give voice to the young people, Black youth that I was representing, the stories that they had to tell about their experiences in the system. And I really hoped that readers could find themselves in these stories, see themselves and say, hey, when I was a teenager, I did that too, and I never was arrested, and I came out just fine. Or my children, my teenage children, do the same thing, and we would never refer them to the court system for that behavior. So I wanted to let readers see themselves, and I wanted stories to change hearts and minds about the juvenile legal system and how we're using it and how it's not serving the purposes that I think most people think that it is. And so my book is a collection of stories as well as some data and some research told in plain language for everybody to understand and to grapple with.
Just for the sake of this, what ages would you consider these to be juveniles? Is it just under 18?
Well, by law, in most states, a juvenile or a child for purposes of court is under the age of 18. But the research tells us that really the adolescent brain is still evolving until age 25.
Okay, because I know that in some cases, younger than 18 have been tried as adults, depending on the severity of the crime. But that's pretty much left up to the judge's discretion, correct?
Well, there are actually several legal mechanisms that allow young people to be tried as adults. One of them is, as you say, judicial discretion to prosecute to try a child as an adult. But even then, it's the prosecutor who will often say to the judge, based on the severity of the offense, I'm asking you to prosecute them as an adult. So that's judicial discretion. There are also laws on the book that make it automatic that a child can be prosecuted as an adult for a certain offense at a certain age. So that's what we call automatic transfer. So there's judicial transfer, automatic transfer, and then the third way is all the power is given to the prosecuting attorney to make the decision on his, her, or their own as to whether or not the child should be prosecuted as an adult. And those prosecutorial decisions are not reviewed by a judge in those contexts.
You had mentioned that your book is a sort of a collection of stories of various cases and people that perhaps, did you have personal contact with all of these people in your book?
So, great question. So most of the stories involve clients that I represented or have represented right here in Washington, D.C. But I also include stories of high-profile cases of young Black children who have been impacted by police or by law enforcement or by the courts. So you'll see, in addition to my client stories, I revisit the story of Tamir Rice, Michael Brown. I will talk about Emmett Till and the historical, relationship, right, between what happened, to Emmett Till and what happens today in the court system. And so there are other, Khalif Browder from New York. I talk about some of the earliest cases of execution, death penalty for children in the United States, which should be no surprise. The youngest person ever, to be executed in the United States was a Black boy. So there's a mixture of stories is the answer.
One of the questions on your bio, your talking points, I'm just going to read it. What do you believe needs to change in the criminal justice system to better serve and protect Black and brown children?
Well, one of the key leading changes we need to make is we need to radically reduce the footprint of police officers in the lives of all children, of all races and all classes, but especially among Black and brown children who are so disproportionately overrepresented in our court systems. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that so many children in court today are there for what we would call typical adolescent behaviors, those behaviors that all of us did when we were kids, whether that's talking back to adults, adolescent aggressive speech, whether that is getting into a school fight, experimenting with drugs or sex, skipping school, things that you would be surprised at. So that one of that strategies to reduce the footprint of police in the lives of children is to decriminalize some of those normal, typical adolescent behaviors. The other thing is we need to really rethink, reimagine public safety in our society so that we are not relying on traditional law enforcement strategies for school and community safety. So we should adopt a public health approach that seeks to develop meaningful relationships between children and adults, that a public health approach that is trauma informed. And by that, I mean acknowledging the trauma and addressing the trauma that so many young people experience today in our society. We need a public health approach that is restorative, that seeks to restore relationships that have been broken in our society. So at a much more practical level, we need a continuum of mental health services in our communities and in our schools for young people. We need conflict resolution, social emotional learning in our school systems. We need vocational training. We need to address poverty. And even in schools where there is violence, we need credible messengers and violence interrupters to bridge relationships and to reduce crime.
The public health aspect that you mentioned, do you think that should fall the responsibility into the school systems, or is this going to fall on the parents of the children?
Oh, I think this is I think it's a statewide government funded initiative. In other words, when we talk about reimagining safety, it means reallocating dollars, at least some of our dollars, from traditional surveillance equipment, traditional law enforcement officers on the street, reallocating those dollars to public health. So it can't just fall on parents, right? It needs to be a reallocation of government-funded resources in this direction.
Would there be specific people tasked with this in the school system, or would this fall on the teachers, or it'd be separate people?
Oh, it would. Great question. What we talk about when we talk about a public health initiative, it means bringing in supplemental personnel, right? And in fact, I have a great heart and great respect for our teachers, and so much of I think the challenge they face is classrooms that are too large, the absence of support for them in individual classrooms. Some of the support in classrooms might be a social worker who is designated as a behavioral health or behavioral intervention specialist. That's not a police officer, right? It's not a law enforcement officer. That's not a probation officer, but instead someone who is uniquely trained in developmental psychology who can supplement that teacher and intervene and address behavioral issues. I'm talking about mental health professionals, right? Not teachers, but mental health professionals that are available so that when a child needs that support, they have it on the ground. I'm talking about individualized tutors for young people who have special education needs. And so, no, this would be a supplement to teachers.
Okay, has this been tried anywhere? I mean, are there school systems that have mental health workers in the schools?
Yes, and I would say, across the country there are school systems that have, mental health providers. The problem is that there are frequently not enough of them, right? They're not there all day. They are often off-site and have to be called in. The mental health providers that are at the various schools, often serve multiple schools on a given day. So it's just, the system that we have in place in many public schools is just inadequate. There is a wonderful report by the, I believe it's by the ACLU called Cops But No Counselors. And that report has detailed the ways in which, and they do a 50-state analysis demonstrating the ways in which there are more cops in schools than counselors, psychologists, social workers, vocational specialists, and they literally enumerate that. And you can look that up and see what your state and sometimes even your locale has with regard to that. So yes, these programs are available, just not at the volumes that we need. Many schools also are beginning to introduce social emotional learning into their academic curricula. And again, just not enough of those types of programs that teach empathy and conflict resolution and the other social skills, interpersonal social skills that young people need to engage with one another and to reduce crime.
Well, Kris, on that, we're going to have to wind this down. We are out of time. Thank you so much for coming on. My guest is Kristin Henning. The book is called The Rage of Innocence, How America Criminalizes Black Youth. Is the book out now? Is it available?
Absolutely. It is out at anywhere books are sold, in the mega bookstores, big box stores, as well as in independent bookstores.
Okay. And last question, do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yes, you can find more about the book on rageofinnocence.com. And I should also, if you don't mind, I'll also tell you that the Georgetown Juvenile Justice Clinic and Initiative on our website, you'll find a lot of programming and training and support that supports the written work that I provide in the Rage of Innocence. And particularly if you Google us and you find the Georgetown Juvenile Justice Clinic and Initiative, look for our Racial Justice initiatives, and you'll find webinars and resources, all of which are very helpful as you all are thinking about this work.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you for coming on the show and sharing, and best of luck with your book and your work.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.